At Intersolar 2023, I'm Jonathan Gifford, the editor-in-chief of PV Magazine Global. There's been a lot of announcements here about module and cell manufacturing. That's going to change the supply and demand dynamics. I'm joined by Jenny Chase, who's a solar analyst with BloombergNEF. Jenny, thanks for joining us. What do you make of all these manufacturing announcements? How do you think that's going to impact the market?
Well, firstly, there's going to be a bit of a bloodbath because the prices right now are dropping. And the reason for that is that while there is a huge amount of supply, there's enough polysilicon this year for about 600 gigawatts of modules. Global installation this year is only going to be about 344 gigawatts, we think. Maybe as high as 400 because we're sometimes wrong, but it's not going to be 600. There are high inventory levels in Europe. So the buyers who are here are generally just chilling and drinking the beer from the manufacturers. They're not necessarily here to sign contracts because they've got warehouses full of modules. And so prices are coming down. It's going to be quite nasty, the way it periodically is in solar, because solar is a viciously competitive industry, solar manufacturing anyway.
Well, you mentioned polysilicon, right? So the old NEF, the old New Energy Finance, you kind of made a bit of a reputation for tipping that polysilicon prices were going to plummet and therefore module prices were going to plummet. We've seen these kind of crazy high polysilicon prices in the last couple of years. You expect prices for poly to go through the floor?
Well, they actually kind of already have. So those crazy high prices were $30 to $40 a kilogram for poly. And we just got the latest price index yesterday. It's $9.63 a kilogram. So already prices are back down to kind of a more sustainable level, not quite at their lowest ever level of $6.3 a kilogram in summer 2020, but they've come right down again, and that does free up a little bit more space for manufacturers to get their prices below 16 cents per watt.
Well, and that's the thing, right? So module prices are going to fall.
They are falling.
Well, they are falling, there we go. But at the same time, poly is going to be much cheaper, and things like shipping costs. Remember, they were crazy high.
Down. Yeah, they've come right back down. They're even lower than they were at the start of 2020 now, shipping costs.
Well, then that means that it might not be quite so bad for the manufacturers because their costs are lower.
Well, the issue is that the bottlenecks, so the costs are lower as well, yes, that's why it can go that low. But the bottlenecks, but it's not instantly going to create more demand. Because the bottlenecks at the moment in the European market for large projects are access to grid. In fact, all around the world, grid access is the key bottleneck. But also, even for the small-scale projects on roofs and parking garages and things, it's installation labour that is the bottleneck. And so making modules cheaper will benefit the buyers, benefit the installers, but it won't instantly create more demand. So these manufacturers are really going to be ground down to very low margin sales, I think.
So what do you expect then? Like I know it's an old adage that an analyst can always predict consolidation and will be right at some point or another. But what are you kind of expecting to see? Like there's a lot of exhibitors here today who are module suppliers.
I actually think this year there will be consolidation. Probably in the next couple of years, a wave of bankruptcies to take some of this capacity off the market. It can be a bit messy because often bankruptcies are incomplete and you get a company, for example, shuffling its bad manufacturing assets that are a few years old and use mono-PERC technology rather than the latest. They often shuffle that into a new company and let that quietly go bankrupt. So it's often not a splashy bankruptcy, but I think there will be consolidation through bankruptcy, not through acquisition.
And maybe some of these OEM manufacturers that we don't even really know about too well, they might just quietly disappear.
They might just quietly disappear, yes, or they might sometimes they just pop up again and be with, oh, hi, we've got 30 gigawatts of manufacturing capacity. But they might some of them will disappear.
Well, you mentioned mono-PERC. We are seeing a lot of N-type products here in Munich, TOPCon, but also a little bit of Heterjunction as well. You really see that switch has taken place already to N-type?
Yeah, so as a solar analyst, I very rarely have to care about technology. You know, a solar module is a solar module. If you're financing it, if you're banking it, if you're buying it. However, there are generations going on that these manufacturers have to care about. And right now we're in the middle of the switch from mono-PERC, which gives you a module efficiency of about 21%, maybe 21.5%, to TOPCon, which gives you 22 to 23%. And then the next generation might be heterojunction, silicon on silicon, which we call HJT, which would be 24 or 25%. We're expecting monoperc to be no longer monoperc is still the standard product. We're expecting TOPCon to be standard next year, which means that if you have a monoperc factory, it's got a pretty limited life unless you can work on upgrading it to TOPCon, which you can do, but that costs money and maybe it's not as good as a brand new factory. And that's part of the reason why all the companies are saying, we can do HJT, we can do heterojunction, we're on top of the next generation. And I think some of that is just showing that they could in principle. I actually think that HJT will be a little bit harder to get into mass production for some companies than TOPCon because it's genuinely a more difficult technology to master.
Mm-hmm. And it consumes a lot of silver.
It's about 23 milligrams per watt of silver for HJT compared with 10 grams for monoperc and 13 grams per watt for TOPCon.
Okay. Which makes it a much more expensive module.
Much more expensive and marginally more efficient, but if you can do it right. But yes, I think actually the shift to HJT may take a few years if it ever actually happens.
Okay, Jenny Chase, thank you very much for those insights. Jenny Chase is a solar analyst with BloombergNEF. I'm Jonathan Gifford from PV Magazine at Intersolar 2023.